Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share something that may be of interest to you. I just went on my first real flight, meaning I had the controls almost the entire time, except for part of the taxiing before takeoff. The instructor actually lined us up on the runway and had me put my feet on the brakes, bring up the engine power, and take off and even land. Of course, his hand was right there, ready to help me if something happened, but he felt comfortable enough with me to fly the plane most of the way. It was a Cessna 172, and it was an intro flight. I had been on small airplanes before, including an RV-6, which is a home-built airplane, and a Cessna, I believe it was 152 that my friend owned, which is quite a bit smaller than a 172. The 172 felt really good, actually. The controls felt better than what I remember the 152 feeling like, which I only had the controls for a couple minutes on. But this flight, the instructor, I asked, could we please stall it? And he's like, sure, whenever you want, do what you want. And so put the pulled the throttle out, which cut the engine back, and just pulled back on a stick and kept on pulling back. I was really impressed at how low the stall speed was, and then the plane just dipped right when it stalled. It recovered really smoothly. And then he asked me, would you like to do an accelerated stall? And I said, sure. And did the same thing with the engine running, pulled back, stalled, and it was a little bit rougher and did just fine. The interesting things I noticed were I'm loosely familiar with the aircraft controls because I'm an aerospace engineer by degree, and I've played flight simulators over the years, not recently, but I've always had an interest in flying. I flew remote control airplanes, not drones, but the ones with actually the two sticks with rudder, aileron, throttle, and elevator control. They're quite difficult to fly, actually. And so I flew and crashed a bunch of those, and I know how difficult landing is and what's involved. But the elevator trim wheel, which is on the Cessna, was actually really responsive. I wasn't expecting it to be so quick, but you adjust it just a little bit, and then there was a delay, and then you'd feel the plane just start to pitch up or pitch down pretty strongly. It surprised me. The when we were in the air, the stiffness of the rudder pedals, because you control the rudder with your feet, they're actually really stiff because I guess the aerodynamic load on the rudder and it being a pretty big control surface, it took some effort to press on them. And this was a more modern Cessna with a full glass cockpit with two big Garmin screens, which I'm not familiar with. And I had to ask a few times because I'm used to seeing those old turn coordinating indicators or turn coordinators on the simulators and stuff that I grew up playing, and I knew what those looked like. And on the Garmin, there's this little tiny bar underneath the triangle that you have to line up to get your rudder and your your tilt from the ailerons lined up well. And it took me a while to realize what was going on. And he pointed out to me. He also had to point out the vertical speed indicator, which is just like more like I remember flying the military airplanes and simulators because it had the digital bar inside and then the number indicating your vertical speed. It did not have one of those old dials that was like this that showed your vertical speed. So I actually found it a little bit more difficult to read that Garmin display just because I was expecting something different. But it was a beautiful day. We flew over the water, looked down, saw boats, saw you could see down into the water, saw the gorgeous coastline there here in Florida, and not a lot of wind. And I did feel a lot of sensory overload because there's so much going on. Of course, I had the controls, so I was thinking a lot about what I was trying to do and try not to mess up. But he was like, "Don't worry, have fun." But I was trying to concentrate on what the plane was doing, what I needed to do, and so I found it a bit tiring. And it was a 1 hour flight, but it felt a lot quicker just because there was so much going on. And he helped kind of guide me to the runway. He was like, okay, we're flying parallel, then we're going to turn in 3 seconds. Okay, start turning. And then we turned and flew the base leg. And by then we did hit a little bit of bumps in the air, and I had both hands on the yoke, and he started playing and dropping the throttle even more on the engine, so we would have a better sync rate. And so I just concentrated on the rudder and the yoke, and took it all the way to the ground. And I wasn't really nervous at all because he was there. And to be honest, I was a lot more nervous flying remote control airplanes because they're coming at you like this at an angle, and you have to reverse your controls compared to what you see because they're coming towards you instead of moving away, and they're really finicky and hard to tell what they're doing. But this thing got a really clear view of the runway, just lined up, and I was focusing on a rudder and ailerons and trying to get it lined up. And he's like, okay, come a little bit more right. So I lined up my nose with the runway and just kept going. He's like, okay, pull back and flare, pull back. And he's like, okay, pull back more, and just held the elevator back once we hit the ground to bleed off speed. And then what I thought was going to be really difficult when flying was on the ground, you have differential braking. And one of the tendencies is, because you're used to driving cars, you have this yoke in your hands, and you want to do this to steer the airplane. Well, that doesn't do anything unless there's a lot of wind. Moving the ailerons up and down isn't going to do anything at all. And so I found myself doing this when really it was moving the feet on a rudder if you had some throttle action, or actually pressing the brakes with your toes is what really steered it. So I had to turn right off the runway. So I had to press with my toe on one of the brakes, and it made the plane pivot on that one wheel. And it was interesting. And once I realized what was happening, it was a lot more intuitive of how I'd actually go about doing that. But it was a great experience. I don't know how quickly I'm going to go through flight training and learning how to fly, exactly how far I'm going to go, if I'm just going to get a private pilot's license, or if I'm going to go further than that. But I thought it was a really good experience, and he was impressed with how I handled the plane. Otherwise, I guess he wouldn't have felt that comfortable. He said I got pretty far compared to most of his introductory flights. So maybe I'm going to pick that up as a hobby. It'll just take some time. It's on the expensive side, but seems a lot of fun. And if you have just an interest in flying, maybe you'll find that interesting. But I just figured I would share that. Talk to you later.